Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Independent Consulting Topic Chats, the IC Topic Chats for today. It's January 16th, 2025. We are, oh gosh, I've lost track. We're probably about 215 sessions in since we started meeting in the middle of the pandemic. I'm super excited because today we have Chari Smith with us today. Chari and I can't quite remember exactly how I met her, but it was through, I think it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we were all finding ourselves on this Zoom thing that we are on today. And we got to connecting, and I learned a lot about her. And in the meantime, she's written a book, and she's going to talk about that today and talk to us about why it was a good thing for her. Obviously, she thinks so because she's here talking to us, and maybe it's a good thing for all of us. So, Shari, I'm not going to go any further. I'm just going to be quiet. I'm going to listen, be attentive, and let you take over. So, thank you for being here, and thank you for
Course.
participating in our IC Topic Chats.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm pretty passionate about this idea of writing a book. I resisted writing a book for a long time. I founded my company, Evaluation into Action, in 2005. And so the book came out in 2021. So if you're earlier in your career, I encourage you to start thinking about writing a book now. And the way that came about was I had been asked over the years when I present, I often present on how to build a culture of evaluation in a nonprofit. And more often than not, at least one or two people would ask me afterwards if I have a book. And the answer was always no, I don't have a book. That sounds really tedious to do. And there was something about at the conference in 2017 here in Oregon. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and we had the Oregon Program Evaluators Network conference, and the theme was building capacity and evaluation. And I did a session there, and I had more than one person approach me, just talking about the topic and anything that they I recommend that they should read, and do I have a book? So I took that as a sign from the universe that maybe I should sit down and write a book. Now, I will preface all of this by saying writing a book is not easy, but it can be really fun sometimes and really, really frustrating other times. It took me 3 years on and off by when I started actually writing to when I actually finished writing the book. So I just wanted to set some expectations there. If you are considering writing one, just know it. You need to treat it like any other project and set a timeline for yourself and start moving along a timeline to reach your goals of finishing the book. So, why I am so enthusiastic about independent consultants writing a book is because I have found ever since my book came out, I now have clients that align with how I do program evaluation. So they read my book and then they reach out to hire me and we start working together, and they already know my approach and what my beliefs are around program evaluation. So there's immediately alignment in a way that there never was before. So that has been extremely valuable. Moving to the handout that you have before you on the screen, I don't know how many of you know Kylie Hutchinson. She's fabulous and she's written several books. But the thing she told me when I was like chewing on it, thinking about what to do, she said to think of it as an expensive business card. And that was such great advice. And I encourage you to think of it the same way. It's not necessarily going to be a revenue making project, but it actually really does bring in business in a way that I've never seen before. There's also, and I know Matt sent this out already, a blog post of why I wrote a book that goes into more of that. So I won't focus as much on that here today. But I did want to talk about how I got started. And the very first thing I did was a competitive analysis. And that is a fancy way of saying, like, who else has written on this topic and how is mine different? So, there are a lot of books out there on program evaluation. Mine is targeted specifically to the nonprofit professional as like here are the basics of how you can integrate program evaluation into your daily practice now. Which is quite a bit different from some of the other books out there that are targeted to us, to evaluators, right? So I was looking at who else has a book that is targeted to nonprofit professionals. And then I look at those books and their outlines and their summaries and think about how can mine be different? What can I offer that is not already out there in the marketplace? I'm going to pause right there because that's a really important piece so that you're not putting something out there that is just a repetition of what someone else already has out. So if you've already written something or if you have an outline, I really encourage you to do the homework of a competitive analysis, look and see what's already out there so that you're not duplicating efforts. It will make your book more competitive because it has something that no one else has done yet. The second piece is to really define your style. For me, I wrote it to make program evaluation accessible. I did in the beginning when I was starting to put the book together and get it ready to launch. I did have a publisher, a very small publisher, who has since gone out of business. I will tell you that story in just a moment. It's very juicy. Just kidding. So, what they told me to do is to think about telling someone, sitting on a couch with someone, and just telling them how to do program evaluation. Someone who has no idea how to get started, but knows that they need to do it. So I wrote the book from that kind of style, very casual, very as a matter of fact. And I've been told by book readers that it takes them 2 to 3 afternoons or evenings to read it. So it's meant to be very easy to consume in a short period of time. And defining the style of how I'm going to write or how you're going to write your book before you start writing it is helpful because if it takes a while, like I took 3 years, you don't want your style to change over time, right? If in the first few months you write it more tactical and then you kind of change your voice and it becomes more personable, that's noticeable. So you want it to have the same style throughout your book. So it's a good idea to define that ahead of time so that you're clear and consistent all the way throughout your writing process. I'm going to pause there. Any immediate questions? I'm going to defer to you, Matt, if there's anything in the chat as I go through each of these chunks.
Nope, you know what? We're not quite at that point. We haven't really seen that much in the chat, but go ahead and we'll actually probably do most of our questions after your
Oh, okay.
presentation. Yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of the way that's kind of our routine because
Gotcha.
we're recording. They don't want, I don't know, somebody might say something stupid. They leave it to me to say all the stupid things. So I'll
That's
take care of
that's
that.
good.
And
Then
then
I'll just keep presenting because I
just keep
sometimes I do it
presenting.
in chunks, but
I
I will
know.
just keep going.
But that's actually a
That's
great point. Is people are having thoughts and questions, feel free to put it in here. And I will have questions when we kind of get to the wrap up phase because just probably tactical questions. So I'm personally interested in this idea. But
mhm.
if people have questions that you want Shari to Smith, Shari to answer, I'm looking up anyway. I put them in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. Thanks.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. So, okay, so now so say you have your book and you're ready. How do you decide on how you want to get published? Do you want to do traditional or self-published? And I really wanted to go the traditional route. I did the proposal to the different main publishing houses that do evaluation work. Um, and like I said, I did initially have a publisher. So before I share that story with you of what happened with the publisher, I just want to break down a little bit for you traditional versus self publishing. And I will say, because I ultimately self published, I am totally biased. Like just putting it out there, I am biased towards self publishing 100%. Um, if you go with a traditional partner, publisher, they pay for all the production work. You receive a royalty, which is usually 10 to 20%. They sometimes handle the PR and marketing and events, put you in their catalog, things like that. My experience has been, and what I've heard from other authors, is traditional publishers really rely on the authors to do a lot of the marketing and the PR on their own. So if you self-publish, there is an upfront cost in terms of editing and layout and marketing and so on, but you keep all of the revenue. And that's to me a big distinction. It's like, well, if I'm going to do all of the marketing work, why wouldn't I want to keep all of the revenue? I was really fixated on the idea of having a traditional publisher in terms of establishing credibility, of showing that, hey, someone else published my work, so therefore it is credible. I can tell you since self publishing, that has come up hardly at all. There's just been like maybe 2 instances where it was an issue, but for the most part, being self published has not presented any barriers except for the 1 or 2 I just mentioned to being able to move forward and get reviewed in journals and in other capacities. So, self-publishing, I know, can be a daunting task, but like I said, if you think about it like any other project and break it down into manageable chunks and treat it like, any other project that you have, we're all independent consultants, we know how to do that. That I think I favor that. So before I go into these two questions, I will take a quick tangent. I did not put into the handout the little details about my publisher and why that didn't move forward. But I will say, working with them for the year leading up to when they ultimately no longer were available, I did get the title of my book, which I had struggled with previously for years. They were the ones who did say, like, write it like you're sitting on a couch, which really helped me define my style. So there were definite benefits in working with them. I do believe, as if in self-publishing, there are other companies that provide those same kinds of services. Ultimately, what happened was they went out of business literally right before my book was supposed to be published, right before the annual conference where I was a keynote speaker. It was not, again, telling you, Matt's like, that's bad, bad, bad. It was not ideal. But I just did a quick pivot, and they sold me back the rights to my book, which is a whole other messy thing. But I have no regrets in how I moved forward, because, like I said, then I started doing all the marketing and handling the layout pieces with another company. And by self-publishing, it was a lot of work, and I did feel kind of like, am I doing this right? But I found other self-published authors in the field and felt very supported. So when you are thinking about traditional versus self-publishing, you want to think about, if you have the skills, time, and money to invest in self-publishing, are you willing to hire people to help? And we do live in an age where self-publishing, I think, is becoming more and more accessible. And there are more and more companies that are poised to help people self-publish through all the different phases so you don't feel alone. However, that being said, a traditional publisher will also offer all of those kinds of assistance through all of those steps. Okay. So, do you prefer to work with a publisher who handles most of the publishing tasks? And by that, I mean the layout, the production, all of those upfront costs to get your book ready to be published. Once it's published, like I said before, I think it's worth repeating, the marketing and the PR generally falls to the author, self-published or not. You could tell I'm a little biased, just a little bit. So that's what I think you should consider when you're looking at self-publishing versus traditional. Now, this was generously provided by Denise McMahon. She is what I was talking about, someone that helps authors really develop their work, look at it in terms of marketing, and she provided this content for the handout of who you can go to if you want help with self-publishing your book. So that's listed here. I don't know these folks, but I wanted you to have resources. And then companies that have traditionally published on program evaluation topics. Typically, what they require is a manuscript or several chapters, an outline, a book proposal. I will, spoiler alert, the book proposal, you will need to include some sort of competitive analysis so that they know you know what's already out there and how your book is different. So these are the ones that I see as the primary players. I know there are other people here who may know of other publishers that publish in the program evaluation space. And if you do, I'd invite you to drop it in the chat so that everybody knows. If you want more information in any of these areas, I highly recommend just reaching out to Denise. She knows I'm presenting today, and she knows that, she can provide a consultation if you're interested in that. Okay, I'm going to pause right there, let that sink in for just a moment before I turn.
So if you reach out to Denise, she could be somebody who you're like, I've got this great idea for a book. I listen to Chari talk. I know I need to do a competitive analysis. I don't really know. She would be somebody who could literally kind of talk you through that initial steps and probably can provide consulting services to you
She
if you were
can.
like, is that
Yeah.
is that what, and that's what you're saying when you say we're talking today and maybe people might be interested in reaching out to her.
Absolutely. So she provides, and it's listed here, book coaching, ghostwriting services, marketing strategy, copywriting for book launches and beyond. So she's kind of a great resource for anyone who is in any phase of getting your piece published. Like you said, Matt, even if it's an idea, she can help you explore that idea, but she's someone that you would hire, right? As opposed to going to a book publisher and they take on a lot of those costs. But if you have an initial idea that you want to explore, she would also be a good person to talk to.
Great. It's really,
Yeah.
that's a good resource to have.
Yeah. She's great. Um, and thanks for that question for clarifying. So let's talk about marketing, because this is the piece when I talk to aspiring writers that they are seem the most daunted by. But I really think, like any other project, if you break it down into manageable chunks and do what you have the capacity to do, I think marketing is one large black hole. Like it does not end. You could do it forever and ever and ever. Don't do that. That will be where all of your time goes. Really create a plan and then stick to that plan. Even though it's like tempting to do maybe some more social media posts, or maybe you go do some extra talks over at this place and just really be mindful of your capacity and your time. But what I did about a year before the original release date of my book, I started posting about my writing journey on LinkedIn, and at that time, Twitter, and sharing in my newsletter, just to start to build the hype and the awareness that, hey, I have a book coming out. But I did that a year before the release. And then the launch itself was its own little project, right? I did a lot of social media posts around it. I did a free online event with a client. So a client and I did it together, talking to the participants about how nonprofit program evaluation works and what their experience was in implementing the system that we had set up. We talked about the book content, and she also talked about how program evaluation ultimately helped their nonprofit. So it became more of a Q&A for nonprofits curious about how to get started with doing program evaluation. So there were a number of activities that I did kind of within the first 2 months of the book coming out. And since it came out in 2021, I didn't do anything in person. It was all virtual. And then ongoing, I continue to promote my book through multiple channels, right? Even though it's already out there and selling, people forget about it unless you remind them about your book. So social media posts and in my newsletter, I continue to share about my book. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at what marketing is needed for your book. Think about it in terms of what are you going to do to promote your book before it's even out, and then what are you going to do in the launch period, and then what key marketing activities can you commit to. Okay. The other thing I did do is add a book companion website. I learned by example, and I figure a whole lot of other people learn by example. So in my book, I didn't want to include all of the like large full color examples of impact models and different pieces that I did with clients, but not to mention that would be expensive to print for the book. But what I ended up doing is creating a web address and a passcode that's in the book. And that way I'm getting people's email addresses, but they can access the examples that I refer to in the books. And then I have the clients that provided the examples that gave me permission to share the work we had done together. And then I went through, creating a permission form. So legally, I have all of those pieces in place. So there are no issues down the line of someone saying I didn't have permission to share something from their organization. But I continue to add to the companion website. And when I do, like once or twice a year, I email all the people that have signed up for the companion website. And it's just a good way to keep that dialogue open with people that have purchased the book and have signed up for that companion website. I also, and this is where I was really thinking I would get, there would be barriers to get reviewed in academic journals because I was self-published, but like I said, I think there was maybe one, maybe two journals where it was an issue. But if you go to this link, if you have the handout, you'll see I got 5 or 6 really nice reviews in different academic journals. And I think those really helped a lot with promoting the book over time. So I just rolled out, sharing out about those reviews over time. I didn't do a blitz and share everything at once. And then being a podcast guest. So if you were to think about what podcasts you listen to, or think about what podcasts your audience, your book audience listens to, try to get on there around the time that your book comes out. It's an excellent way to promote your book. Show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Joan Gary with Nonprofits Are Messy podcast? If you're not and you work in the nonprofit space, I highly, highly recommend her. Um, I had the opportunity to be on her podcast, and the day I was on her podcast, 100 books sold, which it was just amazing. So really look for those podcasts that reach your book audience and apply or try to become a guest on that podcast. It's really, I found to be a very worthwhile marketing effort. And then I continue to try and be on one or two podcasts per year just to keep it fresh, just to keep it up there. And I will say, I mean, it came out in 2021 I still get sales reports. My book is still selling, which is exciting to me. So I think just that methodical approach with the marketing and to not stop just because your book has already come out or it's been out for a few months. It's just like us as independent consultants. We need to continue to market ourselves, right? And I have found, and I've heard from others, if you rely on word of mouth alone, nothing else, that event that goes so far. You have to keep yourself out there on social media or newsletters or in other mediums. So here's my book, if you're curious of what I've been talking about. Um, and before we open it up to questions, I do want to share something about pricing. If you self-publish, you have control about the price you set. If you go with a publisher, that publisher may or may not coordinate with you around price. And I bring that up because that's another competitive piece. When I researched what price to do, I didn't look at other evaluation books. I looked at other books that were similar to mine for nonprofit professionals. And it seemed to be most of them fell within the $20 to $30 range. So I put mine at $29. So it makes it pretty accessible. Like I have found people are like, I'll just buy it. $29. Sure, I could do that. It's not a huge investment. And then I got testimonials before the book came out. Like I sent out a review copy so I could get testimonials and share those out. And that's always really helpful. I find these to be just as helpful, if not more, as having a publisher. Like I'm getting the endorsement of these different folks in the nonprofit field. And I also promoted starting a book club. I don't know how many people are doing this for sure. I don't track it. I don't gather data around it. But I have people tell me that within their organization, all of the managers bought my book and they do a book club around it. So that is what I've got to say today. And I thank you all for being here and listening.
Sure. I got some questions for you before we stop the recording.
Sure.
First of all, so we had this conversation about an expensive business card, right? And on the other end, clearly you're talking about this being a revenue generating source. So what's your advice around writing a book for the purpose of making money versus getting your name out and your ideas out there that kind of promotes its own business, which is the business card idea, or so that would be two ends of a spectrum. Where do you see this making the most sense for most of us, and how do you approach that question?
I think that's a great question. So I went in with the mindset that Kylie said, right? Think of your book as an expensive business card. If you have expectations that it's going to be a source of revenue for you, you may be disappointed. However, my experience has been mine has become a very viable source of revenue over the years. And I think that's only because I self-published. Again, a publisher is going to take 10 to 20%. If you self-publish, you get all of it. So I really fully believe that, it's become a revenue maker for me. And yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
I'm going to ask a couple of the questions I've seen in the chat, and then I'm going to get to the questions I told Joe I'd ask, which I ask all of our guest hosts. And we'll get to that at the end before I stop recording, and then we'll open it all up for just general chat conversation for the rest of the hour. MJ wanted to know how you handled making sure you cited and footnoted other people's ideas. She was worried about just kind of knowing what's hers
Mm.
and her genuine new ideas versus what she's read somewhere and she didn't realize she'd read somewhere and is now informing her. So how do you kind of parse out what you know is yours and what is probably from somewhere else?
Well,
Is that right, MJ? I got a thumbs up. Good. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think that is a great question. I mean, I think we're all influenced to various degrees when we hear people speak or when we read something. I think having the best intentions, I didn't have that when I wrote this book. I knew like different pieces that I cited. I was clear on like that's their idea and here's how I build upon that idea. Whereas other ideas that are mine that I talked about, but I didn't have that. But I would say if you're not sure, just to move forward with the best intention, or you can put something in the introduction that, acknowledges this is an accumulation of your experiences and something maybe that I don't know what that legal language might be, but something that lets you off the hook if you do inadvertently use someone else's idea that you didn't realize was you had the same idea. I think two people or more can have the same idea, independently.
It's an interesting conversation because I know when I was doing the dissertation, it's a wholly different kind of mindset. There's certainly things I'm building upon, and I need to cite those things because it's important. And so that's the kind of the technical, doctoral writing kind of style, for that it's also the same consistent with like journals and things. But this is different in many ways because it's got more of an informal. I haven't read your book, so I can't speak to the way you write, but I think in general, we're talking more of a familiar style that's going to be more applicable and useful in many ways that maybe we're talking about writing books here. Vivian wanted to ask, are you thinking about doing a second edition of your book, or is your content evergreen?
Um, that is a great question because I have four nonprofit organizations in my current book that generously gave permission to use them throughout the book, and then their examples are on the companion website. I don't honestly know what I would do with a second edition. I think I am done. And I will add one other thing that I meant to say. I actually did have work with a traditional publisher on a children's picture book that I did. And I regret that. I wish I had self published because I do all the marketing. They don't do anything, you guys.
Well, you
So, yeah,
learned from your experience of doing that
yeah,
for sure. I saw a hand go up, and we'll get to your questions in just a second after I paused stop the recording. But I do want to ask some of those basic questions.
sure.
So, Shari, when you're thinking about independent consulting, if you had to start all over and you had not this network of people and the connections in the book that you have, what kind of recommendations would you give to others or to yourself if you were able to give advice to yourself way back in the day? What would you have done differently? And the reason I ask this question is often have people who join us who are just like, how do I get started with this whole thing? And so, what kind of advice do you give to those people who don't
Mm.
have kind of this resource and this inertia that you've already developed over time?
Well, one, I would say that's a great question. A couple of ideas. I would establish a peer network right away. Just other people where you could be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this client said la 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 or whatever. Get the soft skills piece, right? Get the help with the confidence, but then also any opportunity that you can have to work with a business coach to learn how the ins and outs of running a business, right? Because we are all program evaluators. I did work with a business coach in 2009 because I was getting very frustrated with the process of prospect, proposal, and closing the deal to get the client. And I was getting super frustrated with how to create a process. So my advice would be is don't struggle with that for as long as I did. Find help. Find help. Get help on learning how to do those processes because I think that's really important. And you're going to have to cut me off at some point because I have a lot to say on this. But don't be afraid of setting boundaries with clients, even if it means you will not work with them. Because I've had clients that, oh, it turns out we can't coordinate these interviews like we said we would. You do it. And then I'm like, great, we can do a change order. I learned that. Let's do a change order and it'll cost you X more money for me to do it. So be
Yeah,
really mindful of what is in your agreement and your client. It is not their job, unfortunately, to make sure you are sticking to that, what's in that agreement. So make sure your agreement is clear on who's doing what. And then don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and set the boundary of, hey, our contract actually says you're going to do this. If that's changed, that's fine. I'll do a change order. When I learned about the change order, it just made such a difference in my business operations.
we have several people on the call today who've said the exact same thing, and I think everybody knows I'm thinking about Becky Garrow, who is all about the boundary. She's our boundaries queen, who's here. So we're happy. There she is. So what you said, Shari, is exactly what Becky's told us on many occasions and continues to say it. We love the fact that in fact, Becky has made such an impression on my coworkers that they come into me and they say, well, Becky Garrow would say to me when we're trying to just figure something out. So I love the fact that she's
I
got
love that.
such good attitude about working with folks. Last question for you.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, is an in part. A lot of us are anxiously waiting to see what happens next week with a change in administration. And so the question is now a good time to start an independent consulting practice? Take that wherever you want.
Is now a good time? I
Is
think any time is a good time. You know what I mean? I think
Mhm.
that if you have something to offer and you feel like you can position yourself in a way that you can be useful to potential clients and secure those clients and support and get your financial needs met, I think that anytime's a perfect time. I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years. I wouldn't change a thing. I did it through a recession. I did it through raising two kids. I did, I mean, I did it. And am doing it. And it's hard. It's a roller coaster, but I wouldn't trade it for anything else.
Yep, totally agree with you. I will say I'm just going to add my own 2 cents on the end of this, particularly since a lot of people are anxious right now. No matter when you start a consulting practice, there's going to be you've just got to be ready for to be flexible. You've got to be ready to roll with the punches. Whatever you think is your grand idea is probably not a grand idea because you're going to realize how it actually hits in the market, whether it be um, in the middle of a recession, in the middle of everything going bonkers with great, in the middle of a pandemic. It's always going to be, you're going to need to be flexible and know that you need to just roll with the punches. And whatever's happening, starting with a new presidential administration next week, is not that much different than what we've been dealing with for years and years. As long as Shari's been doing it, and as long as I've been doing it, for my practice has been around for almost 16 years as well. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording, but I do know there's a lot of questions in the chat. I'll start by kind of pointing those out and seeing it, but you guys can also come off mute and ask your questions directly. So with that,
Right.
everybody out in YouTube land, I'll see you guys later. Everybody else stick around, don't go anywhere. We're going to continue the chat.